our son, Yonah Elimelech's Brit. Naomi's been trying to get me to talk about baby's names since what feels like before we got married, really. And I know since we got pregnant, there have been a never-ending list of names and possibilities, and I just didn't want to talk about it until he was born. I figured that I wanted to meet the guy first. I wanted to know what he was like and what he looks like. And the truth is, when it came down to it, his names were really, it didn't take long at all. And we don't always have the best history of agreeing on everything, but this was a no-brainer. We agree with it. So the baby is named for my paternal grandfather, whose name was Samuel Levitt. And also, it happens to be not named for, but it just they're mentioned that my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, also always read Mafter Yonah on Yom Kippur. And so, when you put the two of those together, my one grandfather was simply Yonah, my other grandfather read Yonah. It's the day before Erev Yom Kippur where we read Yonah. It was a no-brainer that we wanted to name our son Yonah. But we also like to talk about what Yonah stood for, the message and the role of Yonah as a prophet. And to think about who we want our son to become based on his name. So Yonah the prophet was a man whose mission from God was really to be involved with the outside world. Yonah's mission, Yonah's nevuah, his prophecy wasn't to the Jewish people. His prophecy was to a city full of Gentiles. That they need to tell them to repent. As we know, Yonah didn't really want to do it. But he ended up getting there. It was a big job. It was a huge city full of people. It took 3 days to walk across. There were so many people, and Yonah's job was to walk throughout the city, to be involved with this outside world, to not just remain in his insular community, but to be involved with and care about people outside of his community. His message was that they needed to be good people, they needed to repent in order for the world, that was what was necessary to bring peace in the world. His name means peace. Yonah, a dove, is a symbol of peace. And so we think that this is an important message for the world right now. I also think the most important part of the Yonah story, where he really learns what God wanted him to learn, is at the very end, after he tells the people to repent, and they repent, they listen to him, and he's brokenhearted. There's a lot of explanations why, but some of this has to do with this notion that they repented after he told them to repent, and often the Jewish people don't always repent when they're supposed to repent. And so he was upset about that, and God taught him a lesson. He was sitting in the sun, feeling bad for himself. Really, he was dehydrated, he was starving, he felt like he was going to die. And God caused this tree to grow and give him shade and give him comfort. And he felt happy again. And then God took that tree away from him. The tree withered and died, and he was brokenhearted again. He was waiting for his death, it says. And God spoke to him again and said, Yonah, what are you crying about? You didn't build this tree. You didn't care for this tree. You didn't take care of this tree. All you did was take from this tree. And you're brokenhearted about that? Think about my position. There's a city with 300,000 people. There's animals there. There's all this life there that I've nurtured, that I've created. And you didn't want them to repent? Think about that. And Yonah gets the message. And he is comforted through that God cares about the entire world, and that the entire world, his value, is important to us. And this is a message that I think and I believe is really the core of the Torah, that we are an Or Lagoyim. We don't exist just amongst ourselves. We exist for the rest of the outside world. And that's a message that we hope our baby Yonah Elimelech gets. I believe that in some ways the message of Yonah is also inherited, values that I inherited from my grandfather, simply Yonah. My grandfather, Samuel Levitt, was a kind person. He was an honest man, and he was easy to get along with. He was a real man of peace, a Yonah. Just like Yonah's name, the dove, is a symbol of peace, that was what my grandfather was. He was also always involved in the world around him. He was a farmer who was farming for the country during World War II. He was exempt from the draft. He was driving pickup trucks to the market at 10 years old, which I always got a kick of when I was 10. I remember driving in the car with my grandparents somewhere, and he told me he was driving at 10, and I was jealous. But I'm proud of the influence that my grandparents, which has led me to a life of learning, living, loving, and teaching Torah, that has always existed hand in hand with an appreciation of the value in the world around and the people around me, both inside and outside of my community. So the other name, Elimelech, as most people here know, if not everybody, that our son had a very auspicious birthday. He shares a birthday with the world, so first day of Rosh Hashanah. And we wanted to pick a name that had something to do with Rosh Hashanah. So one of the major themes of Rosh Hashanah is Malchios, this notion that God is incarnated as King of the world on Rosh Hashanah. And So we picked the name Elimelech, which means that God is my king. Rosh Hashanah, this notion of Elimelech Malchus, of kingship, it really is to teach us and the entire world that we're all one people under God, under one king, ideally. And that's what a lot of our prayers speak for, and give a message of hope that someday the entire world will feel like one people under one king. And that peace will ensue. And that's the relationship between Elimelech and Yonah, with this notion of a hope for a peaceful world someday. So another aspect of Elimelech, which we were excited about, is Elimelech is the husband of Naomi in the Bible. A little weird, but just a connection. He's the mother-in-law of Ruth, and Ruth, we know, is a descendant of Ruth was King David. So at the beginning of the story, there's this terrible famine in Israel, and Elimelech decides to take his people, his family, and move them outside of the land of Israel to where they'll be a little better off. And so the sages have a hard time understanding why he did this. And they describe Elimelech as a gadol ador. He was a great person of the generation who would constantly support poor people. But when the famine came, he was overwhelmed by this responsibility of supporting poor people that he had done his whole life, and he got scared and he ran away, much like Yonah. It's a similar pattern between the two of them. When faced with a great responsibility to take care of those around them, it was scary to them, and they ran away. Sorry, I'm a little bit emotional, so I got to read it. But ultimately, as we know, Yonah did the right thing, and the city of Nineveh was saved. And Elimelech, though he may not have ultimately done the right thing, our sages teach us that it ultimately led to the Jewish people's greatest leader ever, and our future descendant of the future Messiah, King David. Had Elimelech not ran away, his son would have never met Ruth, would have never converted to be a Jew, and there would never be Boaz, there would never be a King David. And so his actions were necessary as far as the future of the Jewish people. There's an interesting fact I also want to point out, which makes Naomi and I feel extra connected to the name Elimelech, which was kind of an accident. We'd already picked the name when I was thinking about what to speak about. I found this fact. And when Elimelech took his family out of Israel, the verse says, "Vayelech ish mi Beit Lechem." A man went out from Beit Lechem, the city. So the commentators point out that this verse is structurally and thematically similar to another verse that's very near and dear to our hearts. Because I'm a Levi, my father's a Levi, and Naomi's father's also a Levi. And so there's a verse in the Torah, there's two other, anybody know which Levi married the daughter of a Levi and had famous children in the Torah? Top quiz. Moshe's parents. And so when Moshe's parents met, the Torah says, "Vayelech ish mi Beit Levi, vayikach et bat Levi." It's a very similar, "Vayelech ish mi Beit Lechem," and the Torah's verse, when Moshe's parents met, "Vayelech ish mi Beit Levi, vayikach et bat Levi." So Naomi always felt like that kind of also talks about us, because I'm a man from Beit Levi, and I found this woman also from Levi. But the theme, why is this thematic? So it's structurally similar because it begins the same way, but thematically, why is it similar? The commentators point out that just as this action, "Vayelech ish mi Beit Levi," this action led to the first redemption of the Jewish people. They point out that when it says, "Vayelech ish mi Beit Lechem," when Elimelech left Beit Lechem, that led to the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people. So it's our hope and our dream that our son, Yonah Elimelech, will help the world become a better place by embodying the messages of Yonah and Elimelech. He'll bring nachas to his family, become an honest, sincere, and pleasant human being like my grandpa, Chaim Simcha Yonah, whose name he shares. So, thank you. We would like to thank their community for being so generous since we got here and thoughtful, especially during our last week. We were worried about what we'd do in the hospital, but people came through, and we had a great time. And just like Yonah shared the message of God in the hospital, everyone said, "Oh, you're off working. You weren't here Rosh Hashanah." But I felt like I was working because nobody in the hospital had ever met and that I was Jew before. And to be there over Rosh Hashanah with and Yom Shabbos for 3 day Yontif, they got quite an education. We especially want to thank Daniela Pressner and her crew for the hard work in making the room special, which we haven't seen yet, but we'll go there in a minute. We thank our siblings, Deborah, my brother, Naomi's sister Deborah, my brother Adam for coming, my bubbies who flew out. Bubby Sarah actually tried to make it a few weeks ago, but it was Bashert that she didn't make it because now she can be here for this. Bubby Thelma's here. Thank you, Bubby Thelma, for coming. And our parents, obviously, and for their constant love and support, and for everybody, and Hashem, and we're just so thankful and happy. So thanks for coming, and we can go to the other room now and rejoice, have breakfast, and party.